I tried to anticipate in my mind what this event was like and what type of people came to it. I think I already told you I didn't know hardly anyone here. Some of you I've been able to make a few connections with, kind of figure out who you are, or perhaps we know someone in common. I do like to watch people, so some of you can't watch everyone, that's too much. So you kind of pick out some and you watch them, and you try to figure them out. So you watch what they do, and when you're nearby, you actually are listening to what they're talking about, and you watch, you kind of figure out where they fit in the mix and who their friends are, who they hang around with. And I also know that often your observations do not end up being correct. You kind of assume, oh, I think I know what kind of person that is, and then when you get to know them personally later, they're somewhat different than that. So I'm leaving with a handful of you that I feel like I know, and then more of you I have thoughts about, like I kind of think this is who you are and what it's like wherever you're from, and type of person you are, but I recognize I'm probably about 75% wrong. But some 25% of you that I can't identify I've figured out pretty well. And it's easier for you to look at me because I'm the one standing up front, and you probably have me figured out too. And maybe you're wrong, and maybe you're right. I thought I'd start with a little story by way that leads into what I want to talk about this morning. When I was a child, I talked to you about the first day I went to school and what a sore disappointment it was that I had to go back another day. Somehow I just missed it that you went to school for more than a day, but I did settle into attending public school. The first 3 years I went to school, I went to public school, kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, and something happened to me that was kind of a scarring experience in school. It was either in kindergarten or first grade. I can't parse out which it was, but I hadn't been going to school for long. I was there long enough that, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm in school. I don't hardly know anyone here. I have a small group who are kind of halfway friendly to me, but I'm in a larger setting than I've ever been in my life. Like, we live way back in the Hecka, we would say. Okay? And here I am, I'm in this room with all these people, and I don't know these children very well. It's intimidating. And I was a timid child. Like, I wasn't one of the children that are running around screaming their heads off. I'm the one that's kind of standing over to the side being quiet back in that day. I was in the lunchroom one day and I was eating my lunch, and so all the children are in there and it's all noisy, and being the timid little person, you kind of got your head down and you're eating your lunch, trying to avoid anything that would draw attention to yourself. I had sauerkraut for lunch that day, which was not unusual. We often had sauerkraut for lunch. We're German type people, and my family also happened to be fairly poor. I don't know if you eat sauerkraut or you enjoy sauerkraut. Sauerkraut's not expensive. You can eat a whole lot of sauerkraut and not spend a whole lot of money. And my mother thought it was appropriate to send sauerkraut in a little child's lunch for school. So I was eating my sauerkraut again, and somebody either across from me or beside me, I don't remember which, one of those loudmouth type children, observed me eating my sauerkraut, and he started talking about my sauerkraut. That, you had sauerkraut yesterday, didn't you? Yes, I did. You like that stuff? It's okay. And I'm just trying to, I want this conversation to end. Like, notice somebody else. I'm just going to eat my sauerkraut. Well, being the type of child that he was, he's like I later became, and like some of you are, you don't let something go. So he started talking about my sauerkraut more loudly to all the people who were at the table. They had other things for lunch, like they had pizza, and they had like nice cookies that came in little plastic wrappers that were store-bought. They had expensive type stuff, and this kid's eating sauerkraut. Kraut is actually kind of a pejorative term for a German type person. You're a kraut. He started singing a little song. Lauer kraut, all they eat is sauerkraut. And then, being an obnoxious little child, he started pounding on the table. Lauer kraut, all they eat is sauerkraut. And he's more coordinated than I was. And pretty soon the whole table was joining in and pounding. And it spread across the entire public school elementary lunchroom. There were like 300 children singing, Lauer kraut, all they eat is sauerkraut. I was in bad shape. And fortunately, a teacher intervened and stopped that type of thing. But for a long time thereafter, I was Lauerkraut. Why was I eating sauerkraut? Well, it was a cultural thing. We ate sauerkraut. But I was eating sauerkraut day after day because we actually were poor. We did not have money. Like pizza was like rich people ate pizza. And to have cookies that came in little plastic or ho-hos, like I would look at those ho-hos and just wonder what a ho-ho would taste like. Never had one when I was that age. Had plenty sense. But I was poor. You know, I'm not poor anymore. I acknowledge in the big sense, yes, I'm a rich person, just like all of you are rich people. But I thought about it when I went back over to get a jacket this morning. I'm wearing a QEU jacket. Do you know what these cost? If you hunt, you know what these cost. I didn't buy it for myself. My boys bought it for me. And the first couple times I wore it, I was about embarrassed to wear it because I knew how much it cost. Okay, I was a poor child, and now I wear very expensive clothes sometimes, and we eat very well at home. We do have our own beef, but we regularly eat filet mignon. Do I eat sauerkraut yet? Oh yeah, if I go to a church carry-in and there's sauerkraut, I'm getting some sauerkraut. Every once, about 2 times a year, maybe my wife will make sauerkraut. But my life is not a poor life. My life is a life that has evidence of wealth in it. And I think most of your lives, you live lives that if you would consider yourself, if you would just look at the clothes you wear, and the food you eat, and the vehicles you drive, and the types of houses you live in, and the things that you have in your houses, if you're honest with yourself, your lives display a great deal of evidence of wealth. You may have high incomes. Some people do have high incomes. I don't think all of us have high incomes, but we have wealth. We have many possessions that are nice. Each generation is getting a little far ahead. Some of you are flat wealthy. Some of you are about 1 generation away. Your children will be wealthy. And some of you, you might be as far as 2 generations away. It'll be your grandchildren who are actually wealthy. But that's the path that our people are on. We are on a path to wealth. I mentioned the book, The Millionaire Next Door. It was written a number of years ago. It's about 15 years old now, written by Stanley and Danko, 2 financial sociologists. It's an excellent book. You can buy it used on Amazon for a little bit of nothing. So you should buy yourself a copy. The Millionaire Next Door by Stanley and Danko. He studied wealth in America. He discovered that in the American context, with a few exceptions, wealth does not endure. He studied wealth within families. He found a 5-generation cycle where families in America tend to rise from poverty to relative wealth. But the 5-generation cycle works the other way as well. On the back side of it, the 5th generation, after a family attains wealth, is no longer wealthy. The wealth goes away. It dissipates. So if you are the generation that is actually admittedly wealthy, your great-great-great-great-grandchildren will not be. They will be poor again. It's a very interesting cycle. Wealth does not endure. And there are limited examples, like people like the Rockefellers, and I doubt that Bill Gates' children, 3 generations out, are going to be on food stamps. But for most of us, it's a 5-generation cycle. And where are you at in rising or falling there? The scripture says that wealth does not endure. It's a true thing. In the type of work that we do, I work for Anabaptist Financial, so we work with money. We just look at ourselves as like we're truck drivers. We just happen to haul money from place to place, from where it is to where it needs to go. So we see a lot of, we might say we see the breadth of the constituency. Our constituency is everything from like BMA, Biblical Mennonite Alliance, up through the Old Order churches. And there is a great deal of wealth across that spectrum of churches. I think that there's 2 ways to look at that. I think it's fair to look at the dangers that are there, because there are distinct dangers. And then it's also fair to look at the opportunities that are there. The fact that we're a wealthy people. A couple of observations, actually 4 observations about wealth in our type of people, like churches like you go to. 1, economic prosperity built on debt and government subsidies is not sustainable. And that is what we, like our people, have especially experienced over the last 2 years. We've experienced a great deal of growth in wealth due to debt and government subsidies. Like all the stimulus money. You know where they say all the stimulus money went? It all went in Mennonite and Amish pockets. Because it went to the English people, and then they used it to buy poly furniture, or to put in a new kitchen, or to eat at the Mennonite restaurant. The money ended up with the Amish and Mennonites. It was all borrowed money. The government didn't have that money to distribute to all the population. So the government borrowed it and created a huge debt that who's going to have to pay for? Somebody's grandchildren's going to have to pay for that. It's going to come due. At some point, they can't kick it down the road anymore. And in the future, some generation's going to be exceedingly poor. Partially because you're wealthy now. We think socialism is a bad thing. You are active participants in socialism. Because some of you took the stimulus money, and others of you had very good years because your customers took the stimulus money and then gave it to you in the form of buying whatever it is that you produce. Your wealth is generated by socialism, and then in the end your wealth will be taken away by socialism. But you have it right now. Just understand it's not sustainable. This doesn't last. So like for you younger people, like all the prosperity that just kind of drips all around you, don't think that that's normal. And don't think that that's going to last forever. You might be the generation that unfortunately it runs out on. And then your grandparents and parents got to enjoy it, and then you pay the bills later. And maybe it won't be you. Maybe it'll be your children that pay the bills or your grandchildren. But somebody's going to be very poor later, and they're going to be your descendants if the Lord tarries. Number 2. Someday these consequences are going to come. So economic consequences are going to come. The economy is going to be, it's not going to be a recession, it's going to be worse than a recession, and it's going to be prolonged, a prolonged period of hardship and privation. When those consequences come, our observation would be we're not sure how Amish and Mennonites will fare. Because we now have an entire generation of business people who never had to operate a business in hard times. They only operated businesses and ran families in times when the money just drips off the trees. Do they actually know how to run a business when things are hard and tough? That's probably an open question. There'll probably be some that make it, like they actually had it in them, they could do it, they can handle it, even if there isn't easy money. And then there will probably be many others that they looked like they were doing very well, but it was kind of like artificial. Like the high water level of money was making them look pretty good, and when the water level goes down, maybe they won't look so good. We think it's also true that because we've become used to inflated incomes and high lifestyles supported by government subsidy, our views of biblical stewardship are changing. You actually don't need the people in your church financially. Like, you don't need them to come help you build your house. Because if they help you build your house, then you'll feel bad about how nice you're making it. So you'd just rather not have a frolic. Plus, if I have a frolic and they have to come help me build my place, then they'll have one and I'll have to go help them, and I won't be able to go camping. Or actually, we had a cruise planned, and I'm not going to stay home from a cruise to help someone on their house. Our sense of brotherhood is less than it was. I think it's still higher than in the general population. We have like a residual treasure or residual value there, but we wonder how strong it actually is. Wealth also has a very strong and negative influence on people groups. So what type of influence over 20 years would wealth have on our people? Is it going to be positive or is it going to be negative? So there's all the doom and gloom, but let's be fair and let's look on the other side as well. Like, is it our fault that we're in this situation? Like, are we to blame that the economy's been good for years and most of our businesses have just made bank over the last couple years? Is that our fault? Like, should we be repentant over that? No, it's a situation that we were put in. Okay? We didn't intend to do this. It's where we find ourselves. I think there are several opportunities. The first opportunity lies in the fact that God never changes. God, who is God in hard times, is the exact same God in good times. He never changes, and if you look in Scripture, you can discern that God always had a plan. And people didn't see it right when they were in the middle of it, but then it's kind of like you get to the end of the story and you see how it worked out, and you're like, oh, that was obviously God. This happened, and then that happened, and then the other thing, and in the end it ended up like this, and you can see in retrospect that God was just kind of drawing a line, and he was getting something done. So if that's the way God has always been, do you think it might be true that that's still the way it is? That this is actually happening for some reason. God, it's part of a plan, and we're in the middle of it, and when you're surrounded by the affluence and the money, you can't quite see very far, kind of clouds your judgment, but there's actually something to this, and it's a God thing. It has something to do with God and his plan. I think you could ask a question. So you go home and it's whatever day of the week when you do your bills, you sit down at the kitchen table or your desk and you pull all the bills out and you pay all the bills and you balance your checkbook and you look at what's left, and it makes you smile a little bit that it's a comfortable amount. Like we're not gonna be on thin rations next week. There's a nice amount left there in the checkbook. Do you ever think about it that why has God put this money in my checking account? Why do I have stewardship over this amount of money? Is there something he would want me to be doing with this? The scripture says that it gives the inference, it uses the language that we should not consume it upon our lust. We shouldn't just want ever bigger things and better things and, well, what's left around here that I could upgrade at this house? That's not why we have what we have, to consume it upon our lust. It's probably more along the lines of like Queen Esther in the Bible. She was told that, well, look where you're at. Look at the position you're sitting in. You didn't plan that. It's not like this little girl dreamed about being the Queen of Persia someday. That wasn't her intention. But Mordecai, her wise uncle, said, look where you're sitting. I suspect you've come into the kingdom for such a time as this. We're coming up to a crisis or a need, and you're going to be the perfect person to take care of this. Maybe the only person who can do this. And we live in a kingdom too. It's God's kingdom. And maybe you and the resources that you have, the opportunity you have to earn good wages, doing good work, maybe that is part of a plan that you're the person that's going to have the money to get something done in God's kingdom. And, well, how much money do you have to get something done in God's kingdom? If you send a Bible to a restricted country through Asia Harvest, it costs $2.50. Okay, so think about this. I do not believe it's wrong for you to go out and have a nice meal at a restaurant. We do it, and you do it sometimes. And you like to go to a nice restaurant. If you go to a nice restaurant, how much are you going to drop on the table till you leave that night per person? Are you going to drop $25? Probably so. What's $25 represent?
10 Bibles.
10 Bibles. So every time I eat, I'm making a decision at a nice restaurant like that. I'm making a decision between a nice meal, maybe with my family, fellowship time, and 10 Bibles. I still don't think it's wrong to go to a restaurant with friends or family and have a nice time. God says he gives us all things richly to enjoy. But I should be thinking, how often should I be doing this? Because maybe tonight we'll stay home and we'll take some of the steaks out of the freezer that are starting to get freezer burnt because we have so many we don't eat them all. And we'll stay at home and we'll have a campfire and we'll grill steaks right out on the campfire. And tomorrow morning I will write a check for $25 to Asia Harvest for the Bibles that we didn't eat up last night. And if there's 4 of you, you'd send $100 and you would send an appropriate number of Bibles. If Serve India Ministries is another ministry we like as a family. They work in India, of course. They run what are called egg projects. They're little tutoring clubs for children, overwhelmingly Hindu and Muslim children. The parents send them there because education is valued in India. The parents want their children to, be able to read English, so they'll send them to these clubs, and they use Bible lessons as the curriculum. It costs $3 a month to sponsor a Hindu or Muslim child in Bible classes. $36 a year. How many of you could afford to spare $36 to put a Hindu or a Muslim child in a tutoring class where they just happen to be using Bible stories as the curriculum? Could you afford to do that? There are people in the world that could not afford to do that. But that's not you. You could afford to do that. So sometimes when you're looking at the resources God's given you, you're looking at your checkbook or your sock drawer or wherever you keep your money, and there's a nice little pile in there. Maybe you should ask, why has God put me in charge of this money? Is there something I should be doing with it other than going to Olive Garden or whatever else I was thinking about doing? Should some of that money be leaving me and going to do something pretty important? I wonder if that's not why God stuck us in this position that we're in right now. And when we looked at the stewardship parable, 2 of the principles pulled out of that are the principles of trust and expectations. You trust people to take care of some things for you because you expect that they will act a certain way. Maybe God has trusted you to have good income, low living expenses, relative wealth, because He's actually expecting you to do something. Like He's watching to see if you're going to do what He kind of wanted you to do. Maybe He was even kind of thinking you would do it. But He's watching to see. Jesus said this way, "My meat is to do the will of Him that sent me, and to finish His work. Say ye not, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes, and look on the fields. They are white already to harvest. And he that reapeth receiveth wages, and gathereth fruit unto life eternal." Okay, I think we're going to leave that, and I'm going to switch to another subject that could take a whole period to talk about. Let's just get real practical about handling money, the money that you have. I think if you're going to be a good steward, there are little practices that you should have in the handling of your money. And maybe you're thinking, oh no, he's going to talk to us about budgeting, and that's terrible. That's dreadful to think about. I agree, it is dreadful. I don't even like budgeting. Budgeting is a good thing, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm actually going to tell you something that is simpler than budgeting and would actually do you about as much good. It's kind of like covert budgeting. You're getting it done without doing all that nasty work of, does this 10 cents go over here or does it go over there? Okay? I'm not a person that does a detailed budget. I think you, once in a while, should keep track of your spending. You do not need a lot of tools to do this. All you need is a piece of paper, probably a couple pieces of paper and something to write with. September 1st is rolling up just pretty soon. You do this for a month. So don't do it tomorrow, but start in about a week here when the month rolls around on September 1st. You take a piece of paper and you make a couple of columns on that piece of paper. The general categories in which you spend money. So you're probably going to have a category for transportation, and you're going to have a category for giving, and you're going to have a category for household expenses, and you're going to have a category for entertainment or doing fun things, okay, and probably a couple of others. And then, starting on September 1st, every time you spend money, write the amount down on that piece of paper in one of those columns. If you stop at the gas station and put $40 worth of gas in your car, when you get home that night, before you go to bed, you get your paper out, you think, what all money did I spend today? I spent $40 at the gas station. I got to write that down, and that'll go under the transportation category. I don't think you even need to bother to write down what it was. Just write down $40. If you go to the grocery store and you spend $72.07, go over to the household category. Well, food is a household expense, and write down $72.07. Do that every time you spend money, whether you spend money with cash, credit card, or check. Then, at the end of the month, you get to September 30th, add your columns up. How much did I spend on transportation this month? How much did I spend on household expenses this month? How much did I spend on utilities? And how much did I give this month? And when you look at the totals, you'll kind of have a heart attack, like, oh no, surely something's wrong. I added wrong. You spend a lot of money. And sometimes it's scary how much money you spend. Hopefully it's scary when you add the giving column up. Oh my, I had no idea I gave that much away. Most of you aren't going to have that problem. Your heart attack will come in the entertainment, the fun things category, or utilities. Dad will be walking around the house, shut off the lights! Something like that. Or, no, we're not turning up the heat. We're going to start the wood stove. You'll learn some things about yourself. And I would recommend you need to do it for more than 1 month. Do it for September, and then give yourself October off, and then do it for November. And then give yourself a month off and do it one more time. Because you don't have the same expenses every month of the year. And that gives you a chance to kind of average it out. How much do we actually spend around here on food? How much do we spend on giving? How much do we spend on utilities? Okay, I'll leave that, and I want to go to the last thing I want to talk about, and I'll spend the rest of the time here. This is not a cheery subject, but I think it's something that it's good for all of us to think about. As soon as I start in here, you're going to think this is for the old people. But this is actually more geared toward your younger people. I pulled this material out of our topic, a topic we use at our Young Family Finance seminar. So this is actually more geared toward the younger people. Some of the old people, they're too old to help. Like, you know how people, they just don't change? But you actually could change. You could do better. There's like more hope that you would take something good out of this material than that the older people would. I want to talk about wills. Writing wills. You know, well, that's old people stuff. Old people have wills. In 2 Kings chapter 20, it says, And Hezekiah was sick unto death, and the prophet Isaiah the son of Amos came to him and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. You need to set your house in order, because you're going to croak. You're not going to keep on living. Okay, now we know that he did get a little extension on his life, but guess what? He's not around today. It did come true. He did die and not live anymore. And if the Lord tarries, unless Jesus comes back, it's pretty safe to say that every one of you, you're going to die and you're not going to live. Therefore, you should be thinking about setting your things in order. We had a death in our community a couple years ago. It was an unexpected death. It was a 42-year-old fella, married, had a whole row of children. A real tragedy, a sad thing. It was a holiday, and took the family, and they were hiking, climbing up on this mountain, and he got to the top, and he had a heart attack and died right there in front of the wife and the children. Terrible sad. But he was gone. You know what? He didn't go back into the barn shop the next Monday. He didn't help his wife sort things out. He didn't do the last 5% of the remodel project that they were just about to finish up at their house. Put an addition on the back of the house. He did 95% of it, but he never came back to finish the last 5%. Somebody else had to finish it. Some of us, the ones that helped with that little committee, we had to help the wife and the children finish up the things that he hadn't finished up. And he had been a very good provider for his family. I'm not being critical in that sense. When we actually looked at his finances and where the family was sitting, they're about better off than anybody in church. As far as having their stuff paid off and some money in the bank and having that type of things in order. But there were other things that were more disorderly. We went into his office the next Monday. Oldest child was 19 years old, a boy, and he had to keep the business going at 19 years old. So we had some mentors for him, and we went into the office, and there was his dad's desk. It was about that size. It literally was so piled up with papers that papers were falling off the sides. The man who passed away was a very good provider for his family. Like, they were not short of anything. He was not a paperwork person. He was not a record keeper person. There was no list of suppliers. There were no cut lists for building barns. There was no record of what bills are due this week. It was just all in a big mess. And somehow he had it all in his head. Like, he could do this. But his son had to walk in, and the entire, I think it was, well, it wasn't full 3 days, it was probably 2.5 days, were spent sitting at his dad's desk. This is you, 19 years old, this is Dad's desk. It is literally piled this high with papers, and we decided we're going to make 3 piles. We're going to set another table over here, and we're going to pick up one piece of paper. And we're going to look at it, and we're going to decide, is this something we have to keep? Goes in one pile. Is this a Burger King receipt? It can go in the trash. Or is this something, we don't know what it is. We don't know if we need this piece of paper, if we don't need this piece of paper. It went into the 3rd pile. It took about 2.5 days to get it done, to get down to the surface of the desk. His house needed to be set in order. Like, it wasn't fair to that 19-year-old to have to do that. I don't think most of you would have that type of problem. But if you didn't get home and somebody else actually had to clean your room out and dispose of everything and tidy up all your affairs, would it be an easy job or a hard job? Are there things that you could do to make it easier for the people who have to clean up after you? When you set your house in order, that means certain things. Literally, like the direct translation would be to give charges. A charge is like an order or a command. You do this and you do that. So when you set your house in order, it involves telling people, like, if I die, this is what you're going to have to do. That's basically what a will is. A will is a legal document that tells someone, this is how you tidy up my life after I'm not here to do it anymore. This is how you take care of things. You you only set your house in order or make a will if you actually think you might die someday. Okay, so if you're thinking you're not going to die, or it's so far off that I shouldn't even waste time thinking about this, then you're not going to do anything about it. You only do something about it if you actually think it's a possibility that you would die and someone else would have to clean up. It involves making very practical decisions. A will, if you write a will, like you go to a lawyer and you have a will written up and you do it right, it will take care of your stuff. There is a piece of it that may or may not be included, and that's the more important part of it. That's the people piece of it. Most wills deal with things. They deal with money and property. But you can also, when you write a will, you can include a guardianship section where you give instructions about taking care of people that you are responsible for in your life. You may notice that it is not a free-for-all when a person dies. Like if we hear that Val died, we don't all boogity over to Coochie Pines because we heard he's got some good stuff, and if I get there first, I'll get it. No, we have this idea that you shouldn't do that. That's not the right way to do it. The neighbors just don't pile over there and haul stuff off. Okay, so we have a societal expectation that there's going to be some order in this. It's not first come, first serve. This, at least in the States, our state governments recognize that this would be a bad situation. If every time somebody died, it was a free-for-all. People would argue over stuff, fights would break out. In the United States, 10 people in the yard would have guns and they'd start shooting each other. So we got to have some rules to keep this from being a bad situation. Even if you are negligent and you didn't give any instructions, your state government has instructions in place. The fancy word is that you died intestate. You died without leaving any instructions. If you die without leaving instructions, it's up to your state government to decide how your stuff gets divided out. They know that a certain percentage of you are either incompetent, dumb, lazy, and you're not going to do anything. So they're going to have to do it for you. It varies from state to state. I can tell you what it is in Pennsylvania. I can tell you what it is in Virginia. I didn't bother to look it up in Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota. But they're all pretty much the same. If you die and you didn't leave a will and you happen to be married, the states fall into one of two categories. In some states, your surviving spouse just automatically gets everything. So if Jesse dies, she gets everything, if that's how it is in his state. There's another way that about half the states are, where they divide it in half and they say, okay, Jesse kicked the bucket, so we're going to take everything Jesse had. He didn't leave any instructions. He didn't get it done. So a state probate court will step in and say, okay, everything Jesse had, we're going to cut it in half, and half of it goes to his wife. And half does not go to his wife. Half goes into a trust fund that will be administered by a court-appointed official, and they will charge their expenses to that half of his stuff. Because they're looking out for the children and the wife might spend it up if she gets everything. So half of it's going to the state, and we'll put it in a trust fund, and then if the wife needs grocery money, she can come and ask, and we might give her some grocery money. But all the while, the lawyer that's in charge of that is charging fees to that all the time. Some of your states are like that. If you die, and there's also states where if you die and you don't have children. So right there in the back, there's a young couple. I know they've only been married 4 months. I assume they have no children. If he dies, in some states, they will divide everything in half, and she will get half. And his parents will get the other half. He was kind of thinking she would get everything. Well, not if you live in certain states. Your folks are going to get half of it. And they might turn around and give it back to her, or maybe they wouldn't. If you want to decide where your things go, you have to write a will and leave instructions. Okay, so let's say you're not married. There's a whole section of you over here that you're not married. Do you need a will? Well, maybe and maybe not. If you are happy with your state's default instructions, then you don't have to make a will, because the state regulations will kick in when you croak, and it will take care of your stuff. Your car and whatever money you had and your little savings account and the $300 that's in your underwear drawer, okay? They'll take care of everything. But the way they're going to do it in most states, if you're under the age of 18, they're going to give it to your parents. Okay, maybe that's exactly what you would want. Sure, mom and dad could use it. For some of you, probably your mom and dad don't need it. They don't need it at all. So maybe you would want it to go somewhere else. Maybe you would want, if something happens to you, everything that I have left, give it to IGO. Maybe that's what you want. Maybe you have a best friend, and you really like that best friend, and they're not from a wealthy family. If something would happen to me, give everything to them. Maybe you have a brother or sister or a cousin or a friend that has a handicapped child, and that child's going to require care. You know, they've got extra expenses. Something happens to me, give it to them. Well, you can do that if you want, but you have to write a will, giving those instructions. That deals with the things. Okay, well, people are more important than things. You know that. So let's talk about guardianship a little bit. Even the state realizes it's not good that it would be a free-for-all. So Jesse's are heading home, and it wouldn't be like him, but he's busy visiting with the wife and not paying attention to where he goes. Choom, over the cliff goes Jesse. And so happens that Jesse and his wife pass away, but the children were in the back and had all that luggage packed around them, and they survived. Okay? What's going to happen to the children if Jesse didn't write a will? Well, the state government steps in again. In most states, they have something called an orphan's court. In some cases, it's a different jurisdiction. But they will step in if Jesse doesn't have a will, and a judge will decide who gets those children. Jesse's parents will not decide who gets the children. Her parents will not decide who gets the children. The brothers and sisters won't all get together in a big family meeting after the funeral and say, okay, well, who's going to take care of the children? Nope, a judge is going to decide who's going to get the children. The judge is responsible under the law to give the children to someone who will operate in the best interest of the children. If you happen to land in front of a judge that thinks it's in the best interest of the children that they attend public school, attend some little Christian school? No, that's not going to give the child a chance in life. The judge will make a decision accordingly and give the children to someone who will send the children to a public school. In the day and age in which we live, if the judge is, they wouldn't say it, but if they have an anti-religion bias, those Wagler people, they were religious. Those poor children have been sheltered and stunted in life. They're taught these narrow-minded things. I'm going to give the children to someone who would be more open-minded and progressive. If you don't have a will and you didn't name guardians, you are gambling that you would land in front of a judge who would make the same decision you would have made. I don't think that's a wise gamble to take. I was involved in a situation in a different state some years ago. Well, it's actually not so many years ago, about 2 years ago. Husband and wife were killed together in an accident. They had a whole row of minor children. None of the children were over the age of 18. They did not have a will. They were not bad people. They were I didn't know the family itself. I only was called in afterwards with others. It was a committee. They were good Christian people, I understand them to be. Members in good standing in their church, raising their family appropriately. They had actually moved away from Lancaster County to a smaller community because they didn't like the influences in the youth group in the community where they were. The youth group that their children would have went to wasn't a good influence, and for that reason they moved, pulled up roots out of Lancaster County, sold out, went to a little outreach community, and were living there, but the children weren't of age yet. It's going to have to go to a judge. So all of a sudden, it's realized on both sides of the family and in the church, we don't have control of where these children are ending up. It's going to go to a judge. So the idea was that, well, we're going to get our heads together. We're going to bring both sides of the family together with church leadership helping, and we're going to look at this and we're going to agree together that we're going to agree some family, we're going to identify a family so that we can go into the courtroom and petition the judge that, sir, we have a recommendation. It comes from both sides of the family. It's unanimous. His side of the family, her side of the family, their best friends are here. We're all signing on that we would petition the court to give the children to this certain family. That was our goal. It took about 2 months. We went back and forth, and in the end, when it came down to it, we had to vote on which family we were going to recommend to the judge. The lady had 5 siblings. The man had 5 siblings. The vote was 5-5. Her side of the family would not consent to the children being given to a family on the other side. His side of the family would not consent to the children being given to the other side. So it had to go to a judge. And the judge picked one of those 2. But what a testimony that was. Conservative Anabaptist people, in the welfare interest of the children, they couldn't even agree who would get the children. When a young family dies, a young man and a young woman, and they leave children behind, that is a very emotionally charged situation. It is a very difficult situation for everybody involved. People are not going to make good judgments. There's going to be feelings involved. They're not going to even think rationally in a situation like that. You can avoid all of that by picking guardians, by saying, this is who we pick to take the children. And then that can go to the judge. In most states, the judge still has to sign off. Even if you put it in writing in a legally executed will, the judge still has to give his yes, okay. But it takes quite a bit for a judge to go against properly named guardians in a legally executed will. A couple of recommendations when you do this. How would you choose who to give your children to? That's a hard decision, and some of you are old enough you don't have to face that decision anymore. All your children are over the age of 18, but if you don't have children over the age of 18, or if you're one of these unmarried people or young married and you don't have children yet, how would you ever decide who's going to get your children? Here's some recommendations, and for sake of time, I'm just going to zip through them. 1, you obviously want someone who would share your spiritual values. Who would raise the children the same way we would raise them? We want someone who's compatible with children. Okay, Okay, you know how your children are, if you have children, how they're natured, and which one is high-strung, and which one melts, if you look at her cross-eyed. Who's going to be compatible? Who's going to be a good fit for raising these children? We need to pick someone who's young enough to joyfully raise our children. God did not give young children to old people, and that was intentional. Old people can make good grandparents. Old people tend to make very poor parents. They either don't have the patience to work through the trials of having children around 24/7, or they're too indulgent and the children get away with murder and end up to be a mess in life. So you want someone who's young enough that they can wrestle on the floor with the children and take a whole day of complaining children and still lovingly put the children to bed that night. You might want to think about, what community do we want our guardian to be in? Okay, that particular family I was referencing, they had left a certain community because they were concerned about moral influences, and we want to raise our children over here. When the judge assigned the children went right back. Right back to the type of environment the parents intentionally took them out of. Where do you want your children to be raised? You want them to be raised in Hayward? Well, you're going to have to pick someone who lives in Hayward. If you think that much of your church that you want the children there, that's where the children got to be, even if none of your brothers and sisters live there. That's a factor you consider. Generally, do not pick grandparents. It is kind of like you're planting a bad seed and hoping for a good outcome. They either are going to be too strict, or they're going to be too loose, or it's going to cause strife between the two sides of the family. Look at the favoritism. They went over there. They must not ever thought much of us. Someone's going to think that in the family. And then probably the worst part is if you appoint grandparents to be guardians for children. Well, grandparents are old people. Old people regularly die. It's bad enough for a child to be orphaned one time. Why in the world would you set a child up that they're going to be orphaned twice before they're married? Seems just kind of foolish to do something like that. Grandparents need to be involved. You can even write that in. I want the grandparents involved in the children's life. You don't want to give little children to grandparents. You need to understand that whoever you give your children to very well might use up the resources that you leave behind. If you're a 20-some-year-old couple, a 30-some-year-old couple, maybe even 40-some-year-old couple, the money's probably not going to last to raise the children to maturity and get them married and set up on their own in life. Whoever you leave the children to, the money's going to run out. So you need to leave the children to someone who would be willing to spend their own money to take care of the children. I don't recommend you just pick a rich family. That's not the goal. You want to pick someone that guy would gladly spend his own money to raise my children the last 5 years and to pay for my daughter's wedding. Like, he would work an extra hour every day and half a Saturday for a year to pay for my daughter's wedding, and he would be glad he could do that. That's the type of guy you want to pick for a husband, a new dad for your children. I think you should discreetly notify some people of your choices. Okay, if you and the wife would both die, that's going to be a traumatic thing for everybody, and then everybody's going to be wondering, well, who's going to get the children? And then they're going to hear, and they're going to be disappointed it wasn't them. You don't add sorrow to sorrow. Let a few people know in advance, like both sides of the family, that we're leaving the children to this couple. And maybe even go talk to Grandpa, Dad, and say, hey, Dad, we're not leaving the children to the grandparents. This is who we picked. And Dad, I don't want you to be the problem when this is revealed at the funeral. you're actually going to be the one dad that's going to stand up and say, yeah, my son came and talked to me, and he told me this is what he wanted, and anybody who's going to complain or go to the judge is going to have to deal with me. Because he told me this is what it was supposed to be, and I'm going to stand up for my son and son-in-law, or daughter-in-law, and I'm going to back them up. This is how it's going to be. This is what they chose. We're out of time here. You should also tell your children. And you might think, well, that's terrible. The children will lay awake at night, and they'll think, Mom and Dad are going to be dead in the morning, so I can't even go to sleep. I'm going to have to sleep in their bed tonight. All they can think about is Mom and Dad are going to die. That will only be for one night. And thereafter, it will be better. It's more the idea that, oh, Mom and Dad, they care about me enough that they made plans. And it will actually will help later, because when the child hits like 13, 14, and they hit that rough patch, and it's not going good with the new mom and dad, and they're laying in bed, and they're mad as a hornet that my new dad won't allow me to such and such. I hate him. And then they'll remember, yeah, well, I remember the time that Dad told me that this is where he wanted me to be, and this is why he wanted me to be here, and you know what, maybe I can work with this. Okay, we're out of time there. If you get one of our will organizers, I think they're all gone, but all this information is in there, and you can get them for free if you call the 800 number. Okay, you've got about 10 minutes for a break.